So I read an article in Scientific America this past week, and it was entitled "The Delusion of Alternative Facts: How Science Can Guide the Search for Actual Truth in a Post-Truth Era." Yeah, it sounds political, but truthfully, everything's political. In fact, the word political means pertaining to public life. But I would suggest that politics doesn't get us in trouble. It's being partisan that gets us into trouble, sometimes real trouble. The authors of the study are neuroscientists who specialize in the study of misperceptions and illusions. Their research focuses on the perceptual and cognitive errors we make in our everyday lives and on the clever tricks devised by painters and magicians who make us experience something that is not there. Like the movie Now You See Me. This charismatic magician leads the group of talented illusionists called the Four Horsemen, and they mesmerize the audience by performing amazing magic tricks and drain the bank accounts of the corrupt and funnel all that money into the audience. There's a federal agent, of course. There's a Interpol detective, of course. And they are intent to rein in on the Four Horsemen so they don't get another caper. And there's a famous debunker, Morgan Freeman, who teaches them how to deal with alternative perceptions. So in the article, among other observations, the authors state that high confidence does not equal objective proof. Now, you can hear that in any way that you wish to hear it, but don't jump to too many political or partisan conclusions. Do you remember the viral dress? A couple years ago, it was this media phenomenon that started with a photo of a dress taken under ambiguous blue and yellow lighting, and roughly half the folks who saw it swore that the garment was made of white and gold, and the other half swore that it was made of blue and black. Man, there was a fight going on with that dress. Both sides felt confident in their assessment, and try as you might, they could not see any alternative. So I'm guessing that we all could agree that Jesus was no neuroscientist, but I would suggest that he did specialize in helping his disciples reframe their misperceptions and illusions about what it means to be a disciple. Jesus says, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Jesus wants to debunk their misperceptions and illusions about discipleship. So before we get going too fast and too far, the text this morning is included in the section that we know as the Sermon on the Mount. The Sermon on the Mount covers a variety of different topics. It includes the Beatitudes, words about discipleship, the way of righteousness. It includes teachings, the results of judging others. It includes how to be devoted, the significance of prayer. That's where the Lord's Prayer is located. The Golden Rule is also there. The problems of possessions are included as well. So it's just about everything you need to know about alternate living as effective disciples can be read in the section called the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus is inviting his disciples to consider something completely new, consider an alternate way of living faithfully, to be good disciples. And these words are disruptive. And we have to hear them in that way. This is not a kumbaya moment. Jesus is debunking their misconceptions. We read that Jesus tells them to turn the other cheek, forego revenge, give more than what's required in a lawsuit, go an extra mile, give to those who beg, lend to those without limits, love your enemy, pray for your persecutors, and greet the stranger. These characteristics of Christ-like living, and Jesus seems to be challenging his listeners, those disciples, to do the opposite of what they have been told to believe. He is offering them a new way, an alternative way that is simply an undisputable fact for kingdom living. Jesus says, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, there is another way. The phrase raises this notion of the law of retaliation, which is found in Exodus 21, Leviticus 24, Deuteronomy 19, and Jesus then contrasts the law with the alternative, an embodiment of an active non-retaliation. One author wrote that the embodiment of this active non-retaliation is a stance rooted in a profound resistance, an unexpected refusal to play the opponent's adversarial game. In a sense, the alternative that Jesus is offering advocates this active non-retaliation against the brute policy of an eye for an eye. Because if an eye for an eye means that proper restitution for a wrongful act is its mirror or reversal, as in if you take an eye, you will lose an eye, Jesus is offering a response which is not an act of opposition, but rather an act of non-opposition, a creative response that works toward extinguishing not the opponent, but the opposition. Jesus says, do not use violence to resist evil. Do not continue the downward spiral of violence. Jesus wants to break that cycle by refusing to cooperate with violence, refusing to get revenge for further violence. He's teaching us that violence in response to violence will only lead to further violence. And one translation puts it, don't mirror evil and repay evil for evil. And Gandhi put it this way, an eye for an eye only makes the whole world blind. The alternative way that Jesus is offering his disciples, an act of non-retaliation stance, has nothing to do with sitting back and being passive and simply suffering the consequences of evil, the evil that we deplore. And the world may teach us that we have to function parasympathetically, that there's only two ways to face violence. Either we fight it or we flee and run away. But Jesus has another alternative. He's not advocating this passive resignation or indifference. He's teaching us how to practice active resistance to every form of violence. And he doesn't just leave us to have this kind of theory of an alternative way without any concrete actions. He gives us 5 actions. First, he says, when someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other one to him as well. And we know that a right-handed blow in a right-handed world would land on the left cheek. To strike the right cheek with the fist would require a left hand. But we also know using your left hand was used for unclean work back then. So what Jesus is describing is not a fist fight. He's describing how to deal with an insult. He's talking about the violent humiliation of a Roman soldier toward the oppressed people of Galilee in an unequal relationship with violent retaliation which would invite retribution. He's talking about humiliation often experienced by the LGBTQ community from the slurs of hostility from others, or he's talking about the kid who is not in the crowd at school, the one who gets picked on, bullied, humiliated because he is different. That's who he's talking about. And turning the other cheek in face of such humiliation would stop the oppressor and assert one's dignity. It puts the oppressor and the oppressed on equal footing and deny them the power to humiliate. You just turn the cheek. We are not helpless, Jesus says. He wants us to do something. He wants us to show the oppressor that humiliating someone is unacceptable to living Christ-like. And he says, now go, if anybody wants to go to law with you and take your tunic, your coat, hand over your cloak as well, because in Jesus' time, as in every time, the poor will forever be in debt. And back then, people could take the poor to court and literally sue them for their clothes off their back. So, Jesus is saying, if they do that, if they sue you for your coat, give them your cloak. Stand naked in the court. Because it's taboo in Judaism and a criminal. So literally, the judge and the audience, the soldiers, would have to arrest themselves for violating the law. Do something. Stand naked. Force them to see you and do not be awed by their power. Respond creatively. Disarm the opponents. Non-violently liberate yourselves. And then he says, should anyone press you to service for a mile, go 2 miles. Why? Back then, the Roman soldiers forced poor people to carry their heavy packs. You guys know what heavy packs are. They were forced to carry the soldiers' heavy packs for 1 mile. That was all. It was required not to force the poor Galileans to walk more than a mile. So Jesus says to them, well, walk another mile then. Force them. Force them to break the law. Force them to be in prison simply by walking another mile with them, with their packs. He doesn't say kill the soldiers or fight with them. Jesus simply says walk a second mile. It's pretty brilliant. Another concrete example is that Jesus says, give to the one who asks of you. Instead of making all our money, instead of protecting it and living afraid, Jesus teaches us to give to those in need. He says, be generous and selfless givers. And he says, don't turn your back on those who want to borrow. Lend to others. Be generous with how you see each other. And from now on, look at one another in the eye and treat everyone with respect and dignity and reclaim your shared connection. So these are 5 very concrete examples how to embody active non-resistance. Examples of an alternative way for the disciples to embrace and embody. So Jesus wants us to resist the evil, to stand our ground, to speak the truth, to insist on common connection, disarm the opponent, risk suffering, love, trust in God, and change the work of our opponent so that the one who does evil or supports systemic injustice changes. So the goal of all this, you know what the goal of all this is? To have a change of heart. To melt her heart, win him over, stop the humiliation and the violence, and simply help other people discover God's reign of love and peace. Thanks be to God.